Right. Well, thanks for all being here today. This is going to be mostly webinar style. And my goal is to introduce you to the final strategic plan and then to give you some best practices on how to be successful in implementing it within the organization. Now, I will be sharing links in the chat throughout our presentation today, but I will, of course, make both this video and all of the links available separately for you for posterity. Another point too, I wanted to call out, some people just always think of questions after they have time to chew on or digest a document. So if you don't have questions during our sort of rapid fire run through today, that is okay. Please feel free to reach out to me personally if you have a question or something you'd like to talk through. Or if you're just not comfortable asking on the webinar, that is fine too. Please do not be shy. I love hearing from folks within organizations. It's one of my favorite things. I'm not just making that up. I am a total extrovert, and one of the loneliest things about self-employment is working by yourself. So don't be shy about reaching out. I'm more than happy to chat with you. So today, our goal is to, and first of all, introduce you to your strategic plan, talk about the frequency at which we suggest you revisit the plan so that it doesn't get dusty, talk about identifying, discussing, and solving, flexing those strategic thinking muscles that we've honed throughout this process, and then some suggestions and best practices on how to report out to the public and to commissioners on progress within the plan. So let's first take a few minutes to introduce you to your strategic plan. I shared the most recent version of the plan with you on, which is hosted on Google Drive. You should be able to download a PDF from there. This is the version that was presented to the commissioners on September 3rd. There were a couple requests for some slight verbiage changes in Objective 2 and I believe Objective 3. So this is not the 100% final version. There will be a couple language tweaks. Once we have those tweaks made and the document is finalized, I'll be shipping over about 24 printed and bound copies for department heads and elected officials that prefer a physical plan, as well as links to the digital plan, a digital version of the framework. I'll explain what that is in a second, and a bunch of other resources for you as well. So when we dive into the strategic plan, it's sort of broken into three sections, if you will. So the first is an introduction to the plan, which shares at a high level, kind of an executive summary, what the 9 goals within the plan is. We have a series of definitions. We use fairly typical strategic planning verbiage: goals, objectives, initiatives, and data measures. So just defining what those are. And then an introduction to what the vision and mission statements are for the strategic planning initiative, which were drawn directly from the workshops we facilitated with you in April, as well as the core values that came out of those workshops in April. The plan narrative is the bulk of the plan. And at this point, I want to note too that we will be delivering 2 different versions of the plan. The only difference is one is slightly longer. It includes a longer appendix, and it's more intended to be an internal facing working document. The narrative pages are exactly the same in both, but we keep getting feedback from clients that we need shorter, more digestible deliverables for the public. When I first started my business 3 years ago, I've never been accused of being concise once in my life, but I had some clients where their final strat plan was like 65 pages. And it's been really fascinating to me that I think our attention span is just shrinking rapidly, because now I'm getting clients who say explicitly, we want a robust strategic plan no longer than 20 pages, which is harder and harder and harder to do. But I think it does have to do with the fact that we just have shorter attention spans. So we are getting these requests to have these concise, condensed documents. So as I mentioned, the public facing document, which will likely find its permanent home on your website, will be a little bit shorter than the internal working version. Not that there's anything in the internal version that isn't for public consumption. It's just longer, because we assume that working in this space, you have a little bit more of a robust attention span for it. So each of the plan narratives has a section that notes why this matters. It states what the goal is, and then it lists an objective. And you'll see that it kind of works like a funnel. There's the big picture goal, then there's the objectives within a goal, then there are the initiatives, which are almost like projects. Those initiatives are where we actually put a deadline and where we assign an individual to take the lead. These also, with the exception of for goal 0, for each of the initiatives other than goal 0, we have data measures, which are recommended ideas of how you could track or measure this. Now, it's a little bit strange to have a goal zero, but we believe strongly that before an organization jump in with both feet into actually getting started on implementing their goals, you need to build an infrastructure within your organization where you are ready to track data, have measurements, and kind of train your leadership in how frequently to meet and check in on goal progress. So we don't want to overwhelm you. We want you to be set up for success. So we're suggesting that 2025 actually be a full year of coaching your organization into being one that makes data-driven decisions. Some departments may already operate like this. If so, great, you've got a head start. But I can say confidently that not all departments across the organization are there yet. And, as much as we may have some that are already using strategic thinking muscles and plans with their departments, we want to make sure that we have all boats lifting with that tide. After the narrative, and this is included in the internal document only, I am a spreadsheet queen. So, and it sounds like Thomas is a spreadsheet king as well, but we love a document that can be edited, right? So we understand and acknowledge that as much as we have tried to make this document as inclusive as possible for the issues the organization's facing, things may change and you will check things off. You might have organizational restructuring where all of a sudden a different department should be tasked with something. This is obviously based off of a spreadsheet. We will not only send you the framework pages as an appendix within the plan, we'll also send you an Excel spreadsheet version of it so that you can continue to edit it as the document lives on. This puts all of the content from the narrative in just more of a work product driven document where it's task oriented. You can also see too, you can see in the third column in this chart, it notes the SWOT area addressed. Now, you might recall when we did our strategic workshops in June, I talked about how diving into the SWOT analysis can be like ripping a Band-Aid off, right? Nobody enjoys diving into the negatives within an organization. So we strive throughout the written part of the plan. I'm going to flip back just so you can see a copy of this yet again. You'll notice we don't have the weaknesses or threats listed on this. We keep the way that SWOT is oriented in this final document exclusively in the internal part because we want this document to be focused on positive, solutions oriented, and future focused rather than dwelling on, oh, we are not performing well at XYZ. That's why we're doing this. Again, just want it to be a more positive document. So you will obviously have time on your own to go through the final version of the document, which will be coming soon. Like I said, it's not going to change substantially from the version I just linked to you. So that's a pretty good document to get familiar with, but the final one will be out later this month once we get those final changes revised. So now that you have your strategic plan, what do you do with it to be set up for success? The first and most important thing is we don't want to let your plan get dusty. Too often organizations bring in consultants like myself and say, great, let's do a strategic plan. I'm not going to lie, it's also something that very frequently happens when you have administration changes. So it is sort of a benefit of being in this business that whenever there's new administration, it's pretty common that a new administrator kind of wants to have a strategy around their administration's focus and agenda, right? But it shouldn't just be a one-time activity. We really want you to be an organization that shifts from thinking of planning as an every few year activity to actually thinking about how you hone those muscles of strategic thinking and you use those same skills we've practiced and begin to plant the seeds in frequently within your organization and your departments. So I am going to walk you through an analogy that perhaps some of you might have heard of called rocks, pebbles, and sand. And there's actually a cute little video that I will link in the chat. You can feel free to watch on your own. I'm not going to show it on the screen now. Again, I'll also send that email out after today. But this is an analogy that is often used to look at time management, productivity, and prioritization in a range of different contexts, be it from life coaching to executive training. So I'll walk you through it and forgive my very amateur images that I use in this. The video is much cuter. So let's think about our day-to-day, right? I'm sure we have some folks that approach the day as whatever comes, I'll handle. We have some folks who maybe wake up and make a to-do list. There's all sorts of different personalities and approaches to time management. But one thing I know for sure after working in local government myself for a decade is we make plans and God laughs, right? So let's imagine that the glass mason jar is the time that we have in our day. Now, Legally speaking, that should be 8 hours, right? But we all know that some days are longer than others because we have to put the time in to get our work done. Now, there's different parts of your day that fill up that jar. The rocks are our big picture priorities. They're what we hope to achieve, sort of those legacy lending elements of the big things we'll accomplish within our organization. The pebbles are your regular day to day tasks. And then the sand is all that other stuff. And local government, I think, perhaps more than a lot of businesses, has a lot more of all that other stuff because it's highly public facing and highly accessible to the public. And while many private organizations have a board of directors at the helm, it seems in many organizations, I won't say all, elected officials that are public representatives, in this case, commissioners, they are sort of a mouthpiece directly from the public to departments. So depending on your department, you may get a lot of feedback and suggestions for reprioritization from folks that are connected directly to the public. So the whole idea is, how do we maximize our time, but make sure that we have time for those strategic priorities? Because we all know how it is. If we don't make time for something big, it never happens. And you can see here, the sand and the pebbles have filled the majority of the jar. There's simply no time left to focus on those big picture priorities. So what if we focused on our rocks first? What if we focused on our big picture strategic priorities first, then let the day-to-day tasks of our job fill in, and then lastly, let that sand or those little emergencies fill in around the cracks? Now, I know some people are like, okay, I get this is just a visual, but I'm skeptical, right? I really don't believe that necessarily a different approach to prioritize strategic goals first is going to really merit such drastically different results with the same 8 hours a day. So I hear you. I get it. I would be skeptical too. So let's switch our lens for a second. And instead of talking about our strategic goals, let's talk about something that many of us have a goal every new year or every beginning of every school year to do more of: working out. So I pulled from Forbes several years ago, what are the top 4 ways to make time for a workout? And here were some of the things that they suggested. So, prioritizing scheduling, making it the first priority of your day, having an accountability partner, or having the correct tools on hand so you're less likely to make an excuse not to do it. Now, these all make sense, right? It's honestly remarkably similar. We could just copy and paste if our goal is not to work out more, but instead to make more time within our work week or work day or work quarter, et cetera, to prioritize strategic goals. If we have regularly recurring time set aside within our organization to focus on strategic goals and unpack our progress on them, if we have our tools, like our goals and our issues that we're facing listed and on hand, and if we have accountability with our colleagues, we'll be more successful in implementing our strategic plan and sticking to it just like we would working out. So what does that look like, revisiting this plan? This plan, as much as we did manage to distill it down to, I think, a final 22 pages, it's still pretty meaty. I believe at last count, there were 77 objectives under the 9 goals. Or excuse me, 77 initiatives. So it is pretty meaty. There's a lot in it. And as much as you have 5 years to implement all of it, hopefully, we'd be naive to say that this is just, no big deal. We'll have enough time to do it. We won't unless we're very intentional about how we implement. So let's talk about that. I know that 77 initiatives in a plan is really overwhelming, but I want to remind you that we only have to take on one initiative at a time. Okay. Just as that expression goes, there's only one way to eat an elephant. You're going to approach your strategic plan one initiative at a time. So even if this is overwhelming, it will be less so when we set ourselves up with a structured, digestible approach. So we recommend to our clients that you revisit your strategic plan on a bi-weekly basis. For an organization of your size, we don't recommend weekly, but at least every other week. So that means 1 hour every other week. The first year that we see implementation happening will likely happen first at a leadership level. We'll see department heads working together with administration on these bi-weekly strategic plan check-in meetings. We have a structured agenda that we suggest of how you approach it. And the first year will really be training leadership in how to do this. We don't envision that you will bring your departments directly into implementation into year 2. So it's a bit of a train the trainer approach. Now, we've included guides and sample agendas in our resource kit that we will share with you on how we suggest these meetings flow. But of course, it's not just a 2 week goal. That's not the only time you're going to check in. Every 2 weeks will be kind of your micro meeting where it's really focused on the nitty gritty, but there's also an element of visioning and that big picture thinking that happens each year too. So we suggest that your full document, which we've delivered here, be revisited every 3 to 5 years. For larger organizations like a county government, it's typically on the 5 year end. This is the only example of facilitation where we really feel strongly you should have a neutral outside facilitator. You don't need to invest resources into external facilitators for the more frequent internal organizational check-ins. That can be facilitated internally through your administration. The goal for a full strategic plan rewrite is to revisit your mission and vision and values, do a full SWOT analysis, and define strategic outcomes for the next 5 years to come. And obviously, this is a lengthy process. We've been working together since March of this year, so it can take upwards of 6 months. Now, once a year internally, we suggest that you have a 1 hour big picture goal setting meeting. Now, these are pretty fuzzy. Just as our future vision for the organization was fuzzy, so should your 3 year goals be. They're fuzzy enough that you can be flexible, but you can also head in that direction. A little bit longer meeting, we suggest once a year that you have a next year goal setting. This can be combined with your 3 year goal setting. You can do sort of a part day, 3 hour retreat for department heads once a year where you're focusing on your more actionable, SMART goals for the year to come, plus those fuzzy 3 year goals. And again, across both of these, you're looking at 2 to 3 hours total. Quarterly, this is a little bit of a longer time commitment. We suggest that each department work with administration to boil down your big picture 1 year or 3 year goals into 90-day increments. There's a lot of science about how our brains actually operate best with goals within a 90-day window. Our brain actually doesn't really distinguish the difference between 91 days or 365 days. We do best within that 3-month window. So knowing that, we suggest that you follow this approach of a quarterly check-in that's a little bit longer, where you're really working on developing your departmental goals that tie to the strategic plan. Now, what does that biweekly meeting look like? That would likely start, as I said, in year one with administration and associated department heads. We have a specific agenda for that meeting that we will share. And the goal is to check in on those emerging issues. So you remember we talked about those SAND or those day-to-day issues that pop up. Those can be so distracting. And your biweekly meetings actually offer an opportunity to do two things. The first is to set a boundary. So if you get either or a constituent or a commissioner or whoever it may be that suggests, hey, this is an immediate priority, it's a quote unquote emergency, I need you to work on this, you get to be a filter and decide, A, is it really emergency? Unless you're in the sheriff's department, I would bet many of them are not actually true life or death emergencies, right? And then say, hey, this is a great opportunity for me to bring this emerging issue up at my biweekly strat planning meeting because we have time on the agenda set aside to go through emerging issues. That gives you an exact date on your calendar where you will review it. It gives you time to gather information you may need to review it in earnest. And it also helps you to communicate when you'll get back to an individual by. So if someone reaches out to you today and you have your strat plan check-in meeting next week, you can say, great, we're meeting next Monday. I'll get back to you by next Tuesday with what came out of that. Some people may not like these boundaries because it doesn't seem immediate enough for them, but truly you are entitled to set a boundary so that you can discuss an issue with your peers in a collaborative state and give this issue the attention that it deserves. And then lastly, this biweekly meeting with your peers also gives you that accountability component of how to check in with others and ensure that you're on track. But we really stress that this accountability check-in should be done without judgment. We'll talk a little bit more about that, about how it's important to have a psychologically safe space within your organization. Now, all of the tools and recommendations that I'm suggesting are based from a concept called EOS, which stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System, which is a concept that was come up with in the 90s by a gentleman named Gino Wickman. I read these books right when I started my business, and it's this shockingly simple approach of how to run your organization so that everyone is on the same page. And it gives you the tools as a leader within your organization of not only how to approach goal setting, but also how to structure your organization, how to hire the right people, and how to measure your progress. And I have talked to organizations that run on this, and I really feel that this sort of decision-making process is something local governments are missing. So I really believe in this. I will also note I make absolutely no money by referring EOS. I wish I was like an EOS facilitator, but I am not. So I have already purchased copies of these two books for administration. So there are copies available if you're interested in borrowing the ones that are already on site. Otherwise, you can buy used copies on Amazon for like $4. Traction is definitely the book to read. Traction is geared towards a management lens, whereas What the Heck is EOS is very it's written at a much like lower reading level, and it's geared more towards employees, and it really breaks down some of the jargon that they use within EOS. But the EOS framework is composed of 6 pieces that every organization has and need to wrap their arms around. And I always kind of think it looks like one of those Trivial Pursuit pie holders. So the 6 areas of a framework are vision, data, process, traction, issues, and people. And you will see as we go through each of them, we had subtly included many of these pieces and identification in our workshops with you. So we were setting you up to build out part of your framework. And from here, you can move forward in implementing using these pieces and making sure all of these pieces fit together so that you're operating at a highest level of functionality. So let's talk about vision. We went through our exercise where we determined what Kalamazoo County's vision was for the next 5 years. But it's not enough to just have a great vision statement. You need to be able to communicate it clearly to everyone in your organization. So your goal as department leaders should be that everyone in your organization understands and connects with the organizational mission over the next 5 years. This is important because one of the largest factors in employee retention in the public sector is feeling that they have meaningful work. It is not about pay. It is not about benefits. Those rank lower in terms of the national averages and data available to us on why folks stay in or leave the public sector. Meaningful work and collaborative workplaces are 2 things that most talent's looking for, especially younger employees coming into the market in Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and millennials. So this was the vision statement, which is included in the plan that we came up with through our exercise where we all wrote those post-its of the vision that we had for the county 5 years into the future. Now, as far as data goes, we mentioned that we are really setting aside year 0 or 2025 to be your year of building the infrastructure to track data in a meaningful way. So first of all is, do you have the tools to track data in a seamless way? If tracking data is too difficult or onerous, you won't do it. Or it'll be a pain point where you kind of resent the process. That's not what we want. We want you to understand what data measures you're tracking and have tools in place to track it in a way that is easy, seamless, and not painful. We also want you to know what to track. As we noted, each initiative or project measure within the strategic plan has a data measure that we've suggested, but this may not be the right measure. At the end of the day, I am an outsider. I don't work in your departments. I know what has worked in other local government organizations, but I respect fully that you know your own departments best. So you may find that there are other data measures that are a better fit for your organization. You can feel free to edit them. That's why we send you the spreadsheet version. On the same note of data, one organization that I have a huge organizational development crush on is the city of Durham. So I'm actually going to drop this link in the chat. Again, this will be available in a follow-up email. The city of Durham has done a phenomenal job with their strategic planning process, which they call Level Up Durham. And I'm not sure if it's back up and loaded right now, but they had at one point a link live right on their homepage from that link that actually takes you to an interactive dashboard. My goal, I hope, would be that Kalamazoo County moves into having a dashboard like this. I know that they budgeted quite a substantial amount more for the strategic planning process than it ended up costing. What can I say? I deliver great comedy and an affordable price, but my goal is that you guys will also have a public facing dashboard like Durham does. I think this does such a wonderful job of explaining to the public what you're working on, why it's important, and showing those measures that you're tracking so that it offers a level of transparency. It is not to feed into this idea because there is kind of this anti-government distrust of local government mindset that's emerging nationally. It's not to feed into that, but it's to give people confidence that when they invest their tax dollars in your organization, that you are operating in a way that you are invested in continuous improvement. So, like we noted, we give you these suggested data measures in the third column of the strategic framework. But if these are not the right fit for you, feel free to at a department level identify a better measure for you. We would like to see there be some consistency across the organization in terms of shared goals, where each department has similar goals that you are tracking in similar ways, so that we can understand if certain departments are facing more hurdles. But we also understand if some of these may not apply to you. There's quite a difference between the internal facing and external facing departments on how these goals will be implemented. Another piece too, I mentioned a little bit earlier that we don't want there to be a level of shame or competition between departments when it comes to implementing the strategic plan. By following these regular check-ins and using the agenda that we have developed right out of the EOS books, it takes away the emotion of how are you doing when they do a check-in around, or that accountability check on how goals are going. Literally the way they suggest you do it is you go around the table and everyone says if they're on track or not on track. And if you're not on track, this is your chance in a safe space to say, hey, I need tools, resources, or help working on an issue. It is not to make you feel bad that you're not on track, but to provide you the chance to, in a team of collaborative colleagues, have their advice, input, or assistance if it's needed. And everyone knows that when you have data to make your decisions versus emotion, you likely come up with better outcomes. Having these regular meetings and having these benchmark check-ins to say, are we on track with our goals? It gives you the chance to spot problems early. And as I mentioned, having these check-ins to discuss issues gives them the time and attention which they deserve. Process mapping, or doing things consistently within departments in the organization, is one of the objectives in this plan. It is not only a good idea to have your organization run more smoothly, it's also a great tool for succession planning when you have leadership retiring or transitioning, to ensure that your team has the documents in place to pass the baton of leadership. It's also a best way to make sure that your employees' time is being used as efficiently as possible. So, like we've talked about again and again, this theme of sand. Shiny objects or sand can be such a distraction and a disruptor for organizations. By having a dedicated space for issue discussion, you don't let that sand fill up your jar first. The sand comes in the jar every other week on Tuesday or whenever you have your regular check-ins, versus constantly disrupting, taking over your days, and preventing you from implementing your big picture goals. The reason I think this is so important is I talk to so many local government employees who tell me I have to actually do my job on nights or weekends because I have so many distractions and people coming in and disruptions that I can't get my job done in regular business hours. And the fact that these folks like yourself are such public-minded leaders that really care about what they're doing and want to deliver results for their communities, that speaks really highly to your work ethic. But I also don't know that I think it's fair to expect folks to continuously go above and beyond what they're being paid to work to reach those results. If we can change the structure so that those aren't as disruptive and you can get more of your big picture goals accomplished in the workday, that's a win-win for everyone. Now, people, this is a huge theme running through EOS. Now, we know, without dwelling on it too much, there have been some challenges with past administration in the organization, and it's left some wounds and distrust within the organization. That was a big theme that came out in our SWOT analysis, in our interviews, even on the survey. There's some lingering distrust, some sense that sharing negative, honest feedback could lead to retaliation, some sense of fear of sharing views that might be critical of leadership. Obviously, having new leaders in place is beginning to do the work of rebuilding trust, but it doesn't happen overnight. So ensuring that you bring the right people into your organization at a departmental level is key to success. So we urge organizations, and we know this is challenging in our labor market, to really focus on hiring for values. How do you work the strategic plan core values that came out of our exercise we did together? How do you use those as a measure to ensure that you're inviting people into the organization that are at a good values fit? as well as checking your organizational structure. Sometimes it takes having a person leave that's been with the organization for a long time to realize that that structure no longer operates as well as it could in 2024 or whatever year we're in. So ensuring when you bring people into the organization that they are truly the right people and that they're in the right seats to be effective. Now, you'll recall this is actually the word cloud from one of our core values workshops that we did. Here were some of those words that emerged in that process. And then here were the 5 core values that emerged. Some departments may as well have their own core values that they've adopted. That's fine. Different departments have different expectations, et cetera. When I do this exercise, let's say with like a law enforcement department or a health department versus a citywide or countywide government, I get slightly different responses. And that makes sense because we expect different things from folks or the folks that fill those roles based on what job they're in. Whatever your values may be at your departmental level, I really strongly encourage you to find ways to fit those values into your interviewing process so that you can ensure folks that are joining your organization have that important foundation underneath them. Then lastly, are you accountable to one another? Do you have a universal system across all departments where you know your tasks or your rocks that you're working on over the next 90 days? And do you have a psychologically safe space and structure to review and engage in those accountability check-ins with management? And that should really not be centered around scolding or, punishing individuals who aren't on track with their goals, but rather it's to communicate early and frequently if you need resources, tools, or assistance to implement your goals. So I want to talk a little bit about IDS, Identify, Discuss, Solve, which is an approach to issues management. We know that as soon as we print and finalize a strat plan, it's obsolete, right? Issues are constantly evolving, changing, and honestly, 5 years is a really long time. I mean, 5 years ago was September 2019. I don't think any of us in our wildest dreams imagined we would live through the last 5 years we lived through, right? So knowing that, we want you to use these check-in meetings to keep your own issue management up to date within the organization. We like to think that we empower our clients not only to have clear consensus-driven goals, but also to have the muscles and strategic thinking to engage in this work on your own without us. So we suggest that you have ongoing issue lists developed at the departmental level. And again, we're going to give you all of these resources and tools on how to capture these. But basically, when you get those emerging issues, that sand coming in, maybe a constituent brings it to your attention, maybe a colleague, document it. It doesn't mean drop what you're doing to really start noodling on it, but document it. Have an ongoing issues list of things that you are working on, concerned about, or that have entered your brain that you can bring to these biweekly check-in meetings. It's an important part of building an organization that's open to feedback. This can be uncomfortable at first. I'm not going to lie to you. It can be uncomfortable bringing forth issues, especially if it's an issue that shares feedback on how another department engages. But I assure you, to my knowledge, no one has ever died because they had issues or feedback brought up. They may have acted like it, but no one has actually ever left this earth with their cause of death being listed as issue discussion. It's part of building a workplace that's trust-based and one that folks don't take feedback personally. So as I said, we will share this resource with you on how to gather and segment out organizational issues. Another reason why we suggest that you have dedicated time set aside for issue discussion is that too often when we rush discussing issues, we fail to identify the real root cause of the issue, right? We look at an issue very quickly. We're just trying to get it off our plate. And because of that, we lack to diagnose the root cause and we misdiagnose the symptom as the root cause. So you need to have uncomfortable but open and honest conversations with folks and go through a process called 5 whys where you really dig deep. I always say to approach it like a toddler. Why? Go ahead and take that deep dive in the intentional space you have carved out in your schedule to dig into what are the root causes of these issues in your biweekly strat plan meetings. The other thing that we misstep on is when we don't set aside specific time to discuss issues, a lot of times we jump right into solving without actually making sure that the solution we're chasing is the right one. By following that IDS in that order, we identify the root cause, we create space to discuss it with our peers rather than handle it alone. Now, it's important, and again, the agenda alludes to this, when you do discuss issues, everyone should have one opportunity to share their perspective. Without pointing fingers, we all know the people in the organization who politic, right? Who get a bone and they're stuck on it. They can't get off it. And if you give them the floor, they will take it. So by having some ground rules that everyone gets to share their perspective once, you maintain that sort of egalitarian idea that all views matter equally. When discussion becomes redundant, it's finally then time to work on solutions. So you, through this collaborative group of having the meeting of the minds of leadership together, you can produce specific action steps that actually solve the issue, set timelines for completion, and assign individuals. And again, use these meetings regularly as a chance to check in for accountability. So in summary, these bi-weekly meetings are not intended just to fill up your calendar. I am not a proponent of having meetings just to have meetings. It's one of the things that I love about working for myself is I never have meetings unless I'm getting paid to have them, right? So I want, if I'm going to encourage you to fill up your calendar with more meetings, them to be productive and solution oriented. They will have clear expectations, clear agendas, and clarity in who is doing what. It's an opportunity to discuss issues with the attention that they deserve. And even if things get uncomfortable, you know that you're all working towards your shared vision. Now, I know that we boiled down your vision exercise and activity into that vision statement, but I want to dive just a hair deeper for a second here. So you'll recall we had all of those probably 110, 120 post-its all over the wall in that workshop, right? With all of the statements that folks had about their future view of what Kalamazoo County as an organization and as a local, as a representing your greater community, what it would look like 5 years into the future. And there was an external lens that emerged through that and an internal one. So externally, there was really a goal to be inclusive and collaborative with the communities you serve, to be focused outwardly on building happy and prosperous communities across Kalamazoo County, because there is a bit of a misconception that lives alive in the public that Kalamazoo County only serves the city of Kalamazoo. So working to make sure that folks understand, nope, we serve everybody in this county. And then lastly, while you continue to grow, make sure that you do so in a sustainable way so that you don't lose some of the benefits of why people chose to live or stay in Kalamazoo County in the first place. When we look at your internal lens of your vision, you want to continue being an employer of choice, have thriving employees, a talented workforce, and really be known as the best place to work. You want to be forward thinking. Innovation was one of the number one words that emerged in this process, which means having the technology to support you to do your jobs, a willingness to try new things, and processes that are streamlined so you best serve the community. And then lastly, civil leaders who are engaging, welcoming, kind, respectful, that model the absolute best of county government, which means your services are easy to use and access, you're working to serve all residents, and you're fiscally responsible in your practices. So, how do you report out? We have designed a fillable implementation tool for your organization that you can edit in either Word or Adobe Acrobat, where you can, at the department level, add your 5, 3, 1 year, and quarterly goals. And we suggest that you keep this on hand and use this in the future whenever you're doing reports to county board or to your stakeholders, that you can incorporate, here's how we are working on the strategic plan for the entire organization within our own department. So we noted, we do these confidential interviews with all department heads as part of this process. And one of the big things that we see in every single organization is that because government organizations have great breadth and they offer a lot of services, not all elected officials at the commissioner level really understand every single department. And that's to be expected, but it can also be really challenging as a leader when you are reporting to these folks, but they don't really understand the breadth of what your department does. This makes sense. You're the subject matter expert within your own kingdom, so to speak. But how do you translate that into digestible information that those elected officials can lean on so that they better understand your department? So you can manage this issue by using that implementation tool. What you generate from those bi-weekly strat plan meetings will generate content and issues and progress updates you can share directly with elected officials. Now, whirlpools happen. So I know we're, inland here. We don't really have to worry about whirlpools on Lake Michigan, but think about the idea of how sometimes rabbit holes or tangents can take decision makers hostage, right? You're just casually cruising along, doing your work, having a great crisis-free day. when all of a sudden something blows up, usually on Facebook, that all of a sudden has all hands on deck, whether it's to correct misinformation or correct a rumor that's been started or to address an issue that no one had planned for. These things can really disrupt your week and your productivity. So, if your elected officials are the ones driving the whirlpool and pulling staff and departments into this, you can oftentimes steer your ship out of that whirlpool by reminding folks of what your strategic vision is, what issues you're focused on within that, as well as the process you have for reviewing emerging issues. And if you see that mission creep away from the mission you've established for the next 5 years, you can use the strategic plan as an artful tool to say no. By adopting this plan, your commissioners are saying these are our main priorities for the next 5 years. Some things may adapt and evolve, but largely this is the direction we're headed. And you can hopefully use this to stay the course and not feel so pulled nilly-willy like you would if you got stuck in a whirlpool. When in doubt, we always suggest organizations bring it back to their shared vision. We know that in this case, there was some lingering pain in the organization from the past leadership within the organization and this culture of distrust, right? But I was so proud of organizational leaders of how you overcame these challenges and really treated this process with the utmost respect. You created this shared vision on your own and outlined the steps of how you want to get there. And you found a place of consensus, even though things were shaky at times. So you can find steady footing grounded in that shared vision. And I always encourage the organization when things get tough to just revisit that vision and say, this is where we know we all want to go. We're having a disagreement on one small piece of it, but how do we get our heads back in that positive space of this is the vision we're chasing? And how do we use this plan broken down at the bite-sized level at the departments to get there? So that concludes my portion of the presentation. If anyone has direct questions they'd like to ask, I'm more than happy to take a few minutes to answer them. And again, if you're just not comfortable asking on the webinar, do not worry about it. You can feel free to email me directly after this, and I'm happy to chat with you.
Thank you, Allison, for all your hard work here. I really appreciate it, and I can't wait to start putting this into practice in the treasurer's office.
Thank you. It's totally okay if you don't have questions. Most people don't, but I just like to open up the floor if anyone does. If you do not have any questions, you can feel free to hop off the call. I will send out the follow-up links and a link to a recording of this presentation after this. Have a wonderful rest of your day, folks.
You too. Thank you.